Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Pada Padme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu. So we continue from where we left last time. The whole background of Srima Sharda Devi's birth, the circumstances that led, the divine circumstances or the divine vision that led to birth of Sarada, and the nature of her parents, the wonderful noble nature, spiritual nature of her parents, and also the wonderful geographical location of Jairambati, which was a rural setting. And most of the avatars we discussed, they were born uh, they were born and brought up in sorrow and hardship. Is there a reason why it happens? You take the birth of Jesus Christ, take the birth of all other incarnations, like even Krishna, though he belonged to the royal family, he was born in a prison and brought up in a village, in a lowly village of Gokula, where people were, his parents were good, Yashoda and of course the foster parents. They brought him up very well, but at the same time he was raised in poverty. So what is the reason why this thing happens in most of the incarnations? Invariably, except Rama and Buddha. Rama was born in a prosperous Kshatriya family, and Buddha also was quite rich. Apart from them, most of the other incarnations, including Sri Ramakrishna and other incarnations, they were, or Avatara Purushas, they were born in humble families. So one of the reasons seems to be that the personal experiences of suffering, voluntary suffering, it's not that they were suffering because of any misdeed, or they were born or raised in poverty because that was how uh, their circumstances were. So poverty and spirituality have no connection. There's no rule that one who is born in a poor family for that reason is less spiritual, or even you will find there is more spirituality, because if there is some kind of compassion or sympathy, they are sensitive to the sufferings of humanity. Even Buddha, though he was born in a very rich family and his father had ensured that he did not see poverty, it's only after he saw suffering, when he went out of the palace and when he saw suffering, he got the motivation to solve the problems of life. So the presence of suffering in their own life, those incarnations are born with are conscious of their divinity, but when they are born as human beings, as avatars, they come with all the limitations of a human being, and they struggle against it and just show to the world how they can overcome poverty, they can overcome sorrow, how they can overcome hardship. So the worst case scenario, the hardships which human beings have to face, they voluntarily undertake them. Not that their karma brings them to such families, but it is their voluntary renunciation, or you can say the vairagya. So the avatar's primary mission is to replace the degraded and corrupt religious practices which give life-giving eternal religion, the corrupt, to replace them and replace it with life-giving principles of spirituality. So corruption comes when there is power, when there is wealth. As I said yesterday, we also discussed, and the huts of the poor and not palaces of the rich, except Ramachandra and Buddha. But even Rama had to go to the forest and perform so many penances and other things. So though they were born in palaces, Buddha was also born in a palace. They had to mix with the common people. They had to understand the sufferings of the common people. And as the famous poem, if indicates that if you don't lose, if you can move with the royals and but not lose the common touch, so that touch with the common masses, the common people, the uh, underprivileged masses, that is a one of the essential conditions of an incarnation. So the huts of the poor, not the palaces of the rich, where genuine religious traditions are flourishing, love for God, simplicity, humility, and all those things. Generally, it is found in these, if you study history of this great divine people, it is the poor who hold fast to God and his dispensation. Perhaps that is the reason why that the great teachers of the world take their birth in poor families. Now, another word about Vairagya. Yesterday, there was a question where certain things, how do we know what Vairagya is? You see, poverty doesn't mean Vairagya. To be poor, to be born poor, one need not have Vairagya, because Vairagya is something which can come to even rich people. It's not mandatory. And what actually is Vairagya, if we have to understand that, then we have to study the lives of these wonderful people. So yesterday there was a question somebody had asked, which, how do you know giving up certain things in life, they constitute Vairagya, or giving up some other things in life, do they constitute Vairagya? What are the essential things that are to be given up? Now, as a general rule, we had discussed in our Raj Yoga and even in the Wednesday class, which we are going to discuss tomorrow also. But I thought it is not out of the place to discuss this concept of Pravrutti and Nivrutti Marga. What does Vairagya mean to a person who is on a Pravrutti Marga? And what does Vairagya mean to a person who is on a Nivrutti Marga? So what are these two paths? Pravrutti means, if you we have discussed in great detail in our Wednesday class as well as in the Friday Raj Yoga class. So vritti means that which, it's like ripples. Pravrutti means gathering everything towards the self. And Vairagya means nivrutti. That means separating yourself from things and events and all those things. So which are the important things that give you Vairagya, and which are the important things that restrict this Vairagya? We have to understand the hierarchy. Now, as I said, Vairagya means going more and more towards the spirit and less towards bondage of the world. So Prakriti is made of both gross, subtle, causal, and the spirit. Now, somehow we discussed in all our classes, including that of Raj Yoga, we said the problem, Vairagya is defined as that which takes you towards God. Now, that is the only rule, that which takes you towards the spirit, the pure spirit, away from the gross, and that which takes you towards the gross. Now, which are the things which deeply immerse us into Prakriti, which is the Pravrutti Dharma? Pravrutti means accumulating more and more bondage around a particular point, that is the Jiva. The Jiva says, this is my body, this is my property, this is my family, this is my society, this is my country. So all these attachments which are centered around the self, you say my, me and my, mama, and uh, uh, the mama means I possess that. So me, aham and mama. Aham means I and mama means mine. I and mine are the root cause of pravrutti marga. So we gather or heap around ourselves all the things, whether we need them or not, and the more such things are accumulated, the less vairagya you have. That is the idea. So by that definition, we have to decide which action seriously affects our vairagya and which action does not affect our vairagya. So take poverty for example. Srima Sharda Devi, by nature, by her very birth, she was not surrounded with luxuries. So does that mean that such a person has to have vairagya? Because we have seen there are some beggars. who don't possess anything, but do they have vairagya? But if they have attachment towards money, towards, many of the beggars dream that they want riches, they want. So it's the attitude and not what you possess that determines how much of vairagya or how much of freedom you have. Vairagya is associated with a sense of freedom, and pravrutti marga, where the load of your possessions, aham and mama, it goes on and on and on. Your load goes on increasing, and such a heavily laden person is supposed to be away from, he doesn't have vairagya. So when Sri Ramakrishna said that Kamini Kanchan has to be renounced first, why did he say that? What is wrong with Kamini? All the people in the world seem to be living. The only reason why these two things are more important than all the other things, not what you eat, what you dress, whether you have some small things which you possess, they are not, because they giving those up is almost impossible. For example, what you eat is to sustain the body, so giving up food may not result in vairagya. Giving up anything, in fact, for a beggar, if he doesn't have money, that doesn't mean he is full of vairagya. But for example, if he gives up the attachment, suppose somebody gives £1,000,000 to a beggar and he takes everything. The difference is when Swami Brahmananji, a person who was vairagi, he was having one blanket. In the deep Himalayas, you need more blankets, but he was fine with one blanket. That was his need. But one day, one Marwadi, rich Marwadi devotee came, and seeing a lot of people were meditating, so he brought some very, very costly blankets and just kept it in front of all these monks who were not even bothered. Each one was meditating, and Brahmananji was in such a high plane that he did not even bother to see what was in front of him. And immediately after some time, he just opened his eyes, he saw, but he was not attached to that. Somebody has come and given some blankets. Okay, let it be there. And he just closed his eyes, he continued with meditation, because he was full of nivrutti, the feeling of nivrutti, that I don't want to gather things around myself. So then after some time, a robber or a thief comes, and seeing some nice blankets, he quietly steals it. Now Brahmananji could have prevented that. He could have shouted at that thief. He saw that a person is coming and taking. But he was so detached, his attitude is more important, not what he possesses. He had that blanket with him, but somebody came and stole it. So he said, anyway, I didn't need it. Somebody came and gave, somebody took it away. It's fine. I don't. So that there was no vritti in his mind, no disturbance in his mind. So that is what is meant by nivrutti. Nivrutti means we don't have any disturbance. The lesser the vritti is, the more peace of mind you have. So it's that constitutes real vairagya. Nivrutti means going away from. You just get rid of things which you really don't need. So when you analyze each action, for example, Swami Vivekananda used to smoke, but that did not cause any kind of bondage to him. That is not giving up smoking or giving up, and he occasionally used to smoke, like and even he used to eat. He did not give up eating and doing all sorts of things. Everybody does that for survival of the body. They are not important. But why did Thakur say that pravrutti means gathering around yourself? So kamini kanchan tyag means once you give up that desire for lust and gold, then what happens? Why that is known as real vairagya? Because the moment you give in to the kama and kanchana, that is acquiring of more and more wealth, property and all, the load increases, the pravrutti increases. The more you are possessing certain things, the more tension you have if you are attached to that. If you are attached to, if you are gathering these things around yourself and you increase your pravrutti, that is why pravrutti is also in Indian languages, especially in Hindi language, they say pravrutti means to do action. Action is to be done only when you need something. You are very greedy, you do more actions. A person is very active, trying to earn more and more and more and more money. He doesn't even have rest. He doesn't realize that what he needs, he has. He is simply exhausting himself, and one day he will die with all the load and all the burden he's trying to acquire, which he is not using it. He just needs whatever he needs, he has got. God has given him. But if he is not satisfied, that is against the spirit of Vairagya. That is known as pravrutti. Means you're not satisfied with little. So what happens when there is kama and kanchana? Kanchana means gold, or it indirectly it means wealth, property, money, everything that increases your burden and increases your responsibility to protect it. That is known as kanchana. And kamini is that which the creative urge in a human being which wants children. Then you have the children, that urge does not go. That is how Prakriti, there are two forces of Prakriti. One is the Pravrutti force, which gives rise to more and more creation, more and more dependency, more and more bondage. That is known as Pravrutti Marga. That is against the stream of Vairagya. The main Vairagya is Nivrutti, slowly reducing your dependence. You reduce your dependence. For example, as Holy Mother said, the fact that you decide that you will have no more dependence, then that means you have to give up some kind of the creative urge which is within you. When you restrict it, you feel unburdened, you are half free, because it does not, the creative urge does not end with children. Even the urge to have grandchildren and have a huge family to support, that itself is a kind of pravrutti marga. No doubt this category has been, there's nothing wrong in that, but that depends on how much of load one can bear and what one wants in life. If he wants mukti, then should he be adding more and more bondage? It's a common sense question which everybody has to ask. Nobody says that Vairagya is the goal of life. But if you want freedom, then Vairagya is the goal of life. Then Nivrutti is the goal of life. You can't be carrying a heavy load on your head. As Sri Ramakrishna used to say, somebody goes to see a place and he has a huge bag, so many bags. He cannot enjoy his trip. He cannot see all the things. He has to keep it somewhere, or he has to dispose it or travel light. Then only he'll be able to enjoy freely. But unfortunately, the pravrutti marga, those who follow the pravrutti marga, which is the opposite of Vairagya, that is more important. So when we decide how much of Vairagya somebody is practicing, then you have to find out how much more than what he needs a person possesses. If he possesses, or even if he may possess, how much he is attached, how much he is seeking that, how much he becomes restless, how much the mind becomes restless if one does not possess certain things. I mean, it is the kanchana, the greed, lust and greed, it has been translated in. So the real tyaga or the real vairagya is kamini kanchan tyag. That is how Sri Ramakrishna gave so much emphasis to that. When M came, he first asked him, "Are you married?" So M thought, is it such a bad thing to get married? Definitely not. Sri Ramakrishna did not say that. He was worried that half of M's trouble are because of his family problems. He had children. Then he asked, "Do you have children?" Then he said, "Yes." That means he was a bit disappointed, because he expected that this man has genuine spiritual tendencies. And poor fellow, though his heart is good, he wants to become a highly spiritual person. He wants to advance in spirituality, he wants peace of mind, but he's tormented. Why? Because the bondage he has created for himself. It is with that intention. But some people seem to be happy with the bondage. They have big families. That is fine if they are fine with that. But when M was contemplating committing suicide, it is because the self-created burden, the whole family, the group, the joint family that he was living in, the circumstances, the behavior of his wife, there were so many things going against his his idea of peace and some kind of stability in life. It is not the case with all families, as Sri Ramakrishna said. Only one or two families, he said, I find them all spiritual, like Balram Bose's family. Though he had plenty of wealth, he inherited from his parents, not that he earned money. He just happened to be born in a family he inherited. But he saw to it that he lived a very, very simple life. The way he lived, everybody was shocked when they heard that he's such a rich man. He never exhibited whatever money he could spare, he spent in the service of feeding devotees and so much of wonderful. That is why Sri Ramakrishna could eat in his house. He said that is the only house where the food is pure, because everybody in that house is not, there's nobody who is attached to money, though they have money. There's nobody in that family. So he says, apart from, in the gospel, we discussed this once. Sri Ramakrishna says, how many people are like Balram? Most of the families come here when they have trouble, when they have personal issues, when they have, they are unable to bear the burden of their the family, which again is against the nature of nivrutti. But Balram Bose, even though he was surrounded by wealth, he was surrounded by riches, which he did not have to earn, he just got it. He was just, by chance, he was born into a zamindar's family with lot of wealth, property everywhere, but he did not even keep track of what he owned, what he possessed. So he was happy because he was peaceful, and Sri Ramakrishna considered him to be an ideal householder. And he said, apart from one or two, all the other families, all the other people who were burdened with the weight of the world, some of it was self-created, some of it was created by other parts, members of the family. It's not that, but then finally you have to bear the burden. As Hajra had a lot of issues with poverty, but he simply put his whole, kept his whole family with the parents of his wife, and they were looking after him. Even after being married, he was responsible, but he was not willing to carry the burden. That is not something which Sri Ramakrishna liked. If you don't want to carry the burden and the bondage, then why do you create this? Why do you follow the pravrutti marg? He was attracted to nivrutti in a false way. He gave up only when he realized that the burden is too heavy to bear, and he placed that burden on somebody else. That is not a good approach to spiritual life. If you don't want pravrutti, you have to see that you don't enter into bondage. You get more time. If you have your needs satisfied, then nobody tells us to go after greed. So this basic idea of vairagya, if we understand, then we understand that what you eat, what you wear, and the small things, they do not cause a burden. Just as smoking or eating meat or not eating meat or eating vegetarian food, or all these things are they neither constitute any obstruction to your nivrutti marga. Nivrutti marg is obstructed only when there is a heavy load, not the small things. So that is why, in that sense, Swami Vivekananda said, it is insignificant and you need not go into the small things. Somebody may be fasting, somebody may be eating a little more, somebody may be eating a particular kind of food because his health, it suits his health. But the more you go away, the general rule of how to determine which are the things in life which obstruct, which lead to pravrutti marga, and which are the things which lead to nivrutti marga. So things that lead you to nivrutti marga are to be followed, and those are more important when you decide how much of vairagya one has. So for Sarada Devi, she faced dire poverty from the very beginning of her life. But that does not mean that she lost all her peace of mind. It in fact helped her to develop a strength of character, forbearance, the titiksha, to the capacity to bear sorrow. When you are born in a very prosperous family, you do not know what hardship is. Suddenly you lose that money, then you find very difficult to adjust with that. But because she was right from childhood born in dire poverty. They had very little possessions, but the strength of character, the practical wisdom, how not to waste things, common sense, forbearance, perseverance, and the ability to adapt to all the outward circumstances, whatever they may be. Later on, you will see that how many difficulties came. Her brothers were quarreling. Not that her family was, everybody was uh, able to take this, except for her parents who were very noble. Her brothers and all were not like her. So the outward circumstances did not make them spiritual. They, in fact, become more and more greedy, and they were trying to gather wealth. So poverty is not enough to make a person noble. If you that poverty is voluntary, if that nivrutti or the vairagya is genuine, with the idea that I don't want to increase the burden more and more, I don't want to create trouble or sorrow for myself. As Sri Ramakrishna told M, he just expressed, he just told him that this is the reason for your trouble. First he asked, are you married? He said yes, and then his heart was palpitating when he asked the next question, do you have children? And then he had a look of dismay. Oh, my poor chap, he he wants to become a spiritual person. He has come here with so much of hope. He wants peace, he wants spirituality, but before he can even start the journey, there is such a heavy load on him already, so much so that he was contemplating suicide. So that shows that Sri Ramakrishna understood what are the things that bind a person down to the gross world. The more you are away from the gross, the more you are not entangled in the meshes of Maya, as used to. He used typical Bengali verses like Kamini Kanchan Tyag hi Tyag. Means the renunciation of Kamini Kanchan itself is the main thing. Other things are not important. Sri Ramakrishna chewed beetle. There are many things which unfortunately he had to practice because of poverty. He ate food which was stale sometimes, and that led to severe dysentery. They were not good for health, but there was no other way. Poverty made them eat. In fact, Holy Mother had no rice to eat, sometimes no salt to eat. So she was just living, as Sri Ramakrishna had told her, on some greens which she grew in the pond, some greens which are not sufficient to satisfy your hunger. But because of the intense poverty, dire poverty, she was used to that. And with all these things, which might have definitely affected her health, as uh, it happened in the case of Swamiji, because of his starvation, is wandering all over the country, giving up everything, even giving up money. So giving up that money, giving up that desire for having a family and getting married, though Swami Vivekananda had that offer. He was some rich families had approached with their daughters, asking him that we'll send him abroad to study. He's such a bright student. Just he has to marry my daughter. So many proposals came. So rejecting that is real vairagya, not just giving up some kind of food or eating this or eating that or smoking, which are very insignificant. They do not even constitute pravrutti. If he has prevented himself from going on the path of pravrutti, having surrounded by so many mouths to feed, so many worries, anxieties on their account, not only on account of their children, but also the grandchildren, and then the whole network increases. And then you feel you are suffocated, and you feel you don't even have the time for yourself, for because the greed is so much, or the needs may be fulfilled, but since we are not happy with our needs, we try to accumulate more and more, and that causes the pravrutti marg to obstruct our journey. So both are prakrutis. Prakriti is made of pravrutti. Some people who follow the pravrutti, some people who follow the nivrutti. So she only puts a person in bondage. That is why that famous song Thakur used to sing, Sakali Tomar Ichha, इच्छा मोहि तारा तुम्ही, तुम्हार कर्म तुम्ही करो मा, लोके बोले आम्ही करी. So even Nivrutti, that she gives some people that wonderful wisdom to not to involve in further bondage, because as it is, the burden of the body itself is such a big burden. So to add to that the other things, that is what pravrutti and nivrutti. Just I gave it as a background because one should not think that poverty is such a bad thing. Of course, Srima Sharda Devi developed her character, developed her forbearance, developed a sense of practical wisdom, how to live with frugally, with little. And also she developed a perseverance and the strength to adapt herself to outward circumstances. Her father owned some agricultural land on which he grew rice and cotton, but it was not productive enough. It was such a small plot of land to feed the whole family. So what did he do? To survive, he has to do something. So he had to supplement his income by performing puja and worship in private homes, since he was a reputed Brahmin. So somehow they managed to earn some money to feed the whole family. Shama Sundari and the little Sarada would pick cotton from the field and with it made sacred threads worn by Brahmins, and thus that contributed to the family income. So that was one of the pastime or one of the jobs which the women of the family, poor Brahmin families did. They used to go and grow a little cotton and then they used to make thread out of it using whatever instruments like charkha and all those things were there. So there were this technique of home industry where sacred threads and other things, they would not perhaps have the expertise to make cloth, but at least they could make threads and sell it. So that added a little to the family income. So somehow they were managing. So Sarda recalls her childhood. She was very young, a tiny girl, and she says, I would wade neck deep into water to cut grass for cattle, because it was not very easy in Jairambati, because the cows would not be allowed. They would be grazing. If they are allowed to go free in the areas that did not belong to you, they would eat the crops of others, and that would be bad. So they had to be controlled or tied somewhere, but then you have to bring the grass to for eating to the cattle. So she used to cut grass for cattle, and sometimes the grass was inaccessible. So she had to wade neck deep into water because most of the grass grew on the other side of the river. So they had to go there, cut the grass, and wade through the uh, shallow water. It was not very deep. For a small girl, of course, it would be deep, it would be neck deep. And with that risk, she would take the risk and bring so much of difficulty just to help. Her father was so busy earning some money, growing crops and other things. So she helped her. So one year, the paddy crop which they grew, on which their whole year depended. Whatever rice was grown, that would be sufficient for the whole family, at least for a major part of the year. But that year, something strange happened, and big locusts, when they come, these are big insects which just come, and their appetite is so much that they eat practically the whole crop. So they came, and the whole rice stalks were eaten away by this swarm of locusts. So naturally, Holy Mother had to run after the locusts left the field to gather whatever little rice was there, because otherwise they would have to starve. And then from one field to other, she was desperately going to retrieve whatever little rice she could. At least that would be sufficient for a few months. So, and that was one of the difficulties she had to face whenever such calamities came, natural calamities came. Then she says the younger brothers, she had to take them to bath in the Amodar river. There was definitely no bathrooms in those days. They had to go out and take bath in the river, which was like Ganges to us. After bathing, we would sit on the bank, eat puffed rice before returning home. I was always attracted to the Ganga. So they thought Amodar itself is their Ganga. And she was so, just as every Hindu reveres the Ganga so much, So it is this Amodar river, which on the banks of which a tired Sarada, who took her two brothers for bathing, and then she used to mudi, or the puffed rice, which is a normal breakfast come lunch, you may call whatever it is, that is the whole everything that gives you some carbs. So she used to feed them this puffed rice, because after bath you need to eat something. So that is how she had to serve her own brothers, her tiny brothers, even when she was growing up. It's not that she grew up and then helped her mother. Even when she was herself a child, she had to face so much of hardship. So when human beings assume a human form, when divine beings, when the incarnations assume a human form, they say that they are accompanied by their sakhis. Like Divine Mother has some eternal companions with her. They are also born at the same time. When Sri Ramakrishna was born, they say with him came all the divine people who were there in the previous incarnation. When he saw M, he saw he was in the group of Chaitanya. He was in the uh, small group which was singing and dancing with Chaitanya. So that is how the spirituality is carried over from one birth to another. Every time the incarnation comes, he comes with his companions, or she comes with the companions. So Devi also has her sakhis, like the Lord has the sakhas. When Krishna came, he came with Arjuna and all the other Yudhishthira and all those. They are also partially divine. That is why they are born to participate in the divine play. So also, Holy Mother said once, pointing out to the divine beings who accompanied her, who supported her, and who carried out this divine Leela, the Divya Leela or the divine play. So she said, a young girl resembling me used to walk with me and help me in my work. So that is how you see the divine intervenes. No doubt it is difficult, but imagine a young girl working so hard to support her parents. So she found that a young girl always used to join her from where she didn't know, and she would disappear as soon as some other people came. It was visible only to her. So some divine providence provided her help, who used to help her cut the grass, and she thought it was normal, maybe some girl is coming, but it was not a real girl. It was the divine power which came as a girl. And she said this experience which she had from childhood, it continued for a long time till she was 10 or 11 years old. So when I entered a pond to cut grass for the cattle, this girl went with me. As I cut and took one bundle to the bank and returned to the water for more grass, I found she had already cut a bundle and kept a bundle ready for me. So she was surprised. Why is this girl helping me? So this divine intervention we could see right from childhood. Then we come to another beautiful part of Srima Sharda's childhood life. She learned how to read and write. Many people think that she did not know reading or writing, as Sri Ramakrishna gave up learning. But Sharda knew how to read and write. She was enthusiastic, and though it was not considered important to educate girls in those days, it was not mandatory, but on her own she liked. Later, she explained how much she had to struggle to satisfy her enthusiasm to learn. As a young girl, that curiosity, that desire, she was knowledge herself. As Swami, as Sri Ramakrishna said, she was Saraswati herself. So naturally, she wanted to learn. She learned secretly somehow to write, read, which were not denied. Even when she grew up, they said, why do women need to learn? You just look after the home. So I accompanied my brother Prasanna and cousin Ramna to our village primary school. So she used to go with boys. She had so much of enthusiasm that she wanted to learn, and she learned the alphabets. In Kamarpukur, that is probably in 1867, much later, when she went to live with Sri Ramakrishna, She was born in 53, so 67 she would have been 14 years old. Lakshmi, who was Sri Ramakrishna's niece, and they both of them were enthusiastic. They read the Varna Parichay. Varna means the alphabets, part 1, the first primary book on alphabets by Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. But when they were learning, these two girls, the niece of Sri Ramakrishna, Lakshmi, and uh, Sarada, they were both these young girls who were hardly 14. But in those days, even 14-year-old girls, even if they grew up, they become they were not allowed to uh, learn. They said one does not need, because the men used to do all the learning and go to school and earn a living. So women were not supposed to earn. That was the orthodox atmosphere in those days. So when Hriday saw the master's nephew, seeing that this Lakshmi and Sarada, young girls, are reading, he just snatched away the book and said, women should not learn to read and write. He was so uh, uh, dominated by orthodoxy that he did not like the very idea that women are learning. So he said, why do you want to read and write? Women should not learn to read and write. Are you going to read dramas and novels later on? In those days, novels were not so good. I mean, they they were prohibited because most of these novels were not written in good taste. So the idea was that if women read these novels, they will be spoiled. So that was the orthodox idea. They were not given freedom. They just wanted to control them and not allow them. So he scolded them. Hriday said, what will you do? What's the fun in learning to read? And then later on you will read these novels and spoil yourself. So he took away that book which taught these two young girls to read and write. Lakshmi was the favorite daughter of the family, so she did not have to give up her book. So she could study. So Holy Mother says, I secretly paid one more Anna for another copy. So Lakshmi would go to school. Holy Mother was not allowed, but Lakshmi would go to school, and then after coming back, she used to teach. See the type of enthusiasm she had for learning. Even in that orthodox climate where girls were not given the opportunity to learn, she was not that she agreed with everything. She was very modern in that sense. So somehow she managed to get a copy, secretly keep it, and tell Lakshmi what went on, what was being taught in the school, so that she can learn at home. So see the great uh, yearning or desire to learn the alphabets. So Lakshmi would study in school and then teach me when she returned. While I was at Dakshineshwar, now this is much later, I actually learned very well. When the master had to go to Shampukur for treatment in the fall of 1885, just 1 year after his Mahasamadhi, I was left alone. So she was alone in Dakshineshwar. Sri Ramakrishna had to go to Shampukur for treatment. So she was not accompanied because there was no place to stay. So at that time, she was free, comparatively free, and she made full use of that time. So a girl from Bhava Mukherjee's family would come to bathe in the Ganges daily, and she used sometimes stay with me for a long time. She used to give me lessons. So mother's education continued. She knew how to read and write. In fact, Mayer Chitti, there is a book in Bengali. So many of the letters she has herself signed. She could read and write, definitely. So this girl, she used to catch hold of anyone who could teach her, and she could continue her learning. So this girl from Bhava Mukherjee's family, who probably had the opportunity, being staying in the city, they would be getting opportunities to go to school. If their family was very liberal and modern in approach, they would allow their girls to study. So that was the condition under which Holy Mother Sarada learnt her lessons and learned how to read and write, and even she could read the Ramayana and Mahabharata. So I shared vegetables. So as a return, she even tempted that girl to come and teach her, so that she and she gave gifts to her, vegetables and other things which she had. She shared that in exchange for this, she would be learning. So much of enthusiasm, so much of love for knowledge. So Sarada and Lakshmi studied up to Varna Parichay, part 2, the second primary book. There was part 1, part 2. There were two books written by Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar for the rural children. How to Varna means alphabet. So introducing, because Bengali alphabet, all alphabets, Indian alphabets, there's so many alphabets, not so easy. There are so many complex joint alphabets which are known as Yukta Akshara. When two half alphabets are joined together, they form a entirely new alphabet. So they are known as joint alphabets, and that was being taught in the second primary book. So I think she must have had enough knowledge to read any kind of book. With Sharat, a young son of, and that second book she completed, a young son of Pitambar Samanta. Pitambar Samanta was you stayed in Calcutta. He had a young son, Sharat, was a young boy, but definitely being a boy, this son of the Samanta family, Pitambar Samanta, used to come there and teach Holy Mother. He was the store manager of the Dakshineshwar. He used to stay in the city and store manager of Dakshineshwar temple. So somehow Holy Mother came to know, Sarada came to know, and Sri Ramakrishna also arranged this so that they could read Ramayana and other holy books. You see, Sri Ramakrishna himself discarded learning. That is because he was so involved in spiritual, so intense in his desire to get spiritual experience. He discarded formal learning, but that doesn't mean he did not want others to learn. Even his own wife, Sri Sharda, even he knew that she likes to learn. He arranged this Pitambar Samanta's son Sharat to come and teach these women, teach Holy Mother especially, so that they could read Ramayana and other holy books. That was their intention, that to read the scriptures, to read the Bengali books, they need to learn the alphabets. So Sarada also learned how to write. She also learned how to write. That is why we find the wonderful letters she wrote. Some of the letters she signed, of course. Somebody else would write, but she at least signed. People learn more about life through observation and experience than in a classroom. That is a standard thing. Like Sri Ramakrishna, he learned all his lessons of life through direct experience, through observation and experience of the world. You don't need to learn Vairagya from a book. If you see the condition of people who are in bondage, if you keep your eyes and ears open. So that is why once Swami Premeshanandji used to say, somebody was, some brahmachari or some monk was laughing when one very, very depressed householder came. He had so many financial problems and he was full of sorrow, and he was explaining all that. And Swami Premeshanji was quietly listening to his tale of woe and his suffering because of the problems created by his family members, relatives, and the society around him. So seeing his complex problems, he really felt sorry. He said, just go on praying to Thakur, he will do something. Pray to Sri Ramakrishna and pray to the Divine Mother. So he was trying to explain Premeshanandji. And some brahmacharis, just very insensitive brahmacharis or monks, they started laughing. Then Premeshanji scolded them after that gentleman left. So why do you laugh at their misery? You see, Sri Ramakrishna or the Divine Mother, you should be grateful to them that they teach you lessons that you don't get involved in samsara, don't get involved in the world, and don't suffer as they. So they're in fact sacrificing themselves so that you can learn lessons. The same thing Swamiji later on, earlier, Swami Vivekananda also had said this. When he was passing through Egypt and some Cairo, the town of Cairo, where a lot of prostitutes were there. So the direct disciples, the women disciples, were feeling very embarrassed. They said, "Arey, we should not be going through this street." Swami Vivekananda was least unconcerned. He was just walking there and very sympathetic to those women, seeing that how pitiable condition, what a pitiable condition they have reduced themselves to because of poverty, because of certain circumstances which made them follow this undesirable profession. So he was practically in tears when he saw, and those people also just came and fell at his feet. Then they were about the women disciples who were very aristocratic. They thought, oh, Swamiji should not be uh, uh, talking to them, or just they are coming. I mean, this is not a desirable place to stay. So he said to Swamiji, please come, please let us go. So he said, just see how much of suffering these people have, because they have placed all their whole life, they have sacrificed and uh, to serve the body. I mean, the body has become so primary for them. They're using their bodies, their gross bodies, to somehow survive. And I can't see this. He was so sad when he saw this. And he told them, see, what a pity. So, and he said, don't criticize them. They are the people. In one another place, he said, the whole world is full of sacrifices. The people who suffer, they sacrifice themselves so that other people get the wisdom not to fall into a similar situation themselves. So one should have intense sympathy and compassion for such people, because they are suffering in the world. That doesn't mean you are far superior to them. In fact, they are used by the Divine Mother. Their sacrifice is being used so that you get an opportunity. So you should be grateful that you understand. Without experiencing this suffering yourself, you get an idea that it's better to avoid these things. So that is why her observation, I mean, Srima Sharda Devi and Sri Ramakrishna said that life is a great teacher. You don't have to study about Vairagya, you don't have to study about the ill effects of money, Kamini Kanchan, by actually experiencing them. You can see it outside, you can see how miserable people become when they become greedy, when they run after, how their life becomes miserable. And if one is wise enough, that itself becomes a great experience of learning. You don't have to read the Vairagya Shatakam to get Vairagya. You don't have to believe that because the scripture says you have to practice Vairagya, Abhyasa, I should do. It is common sense. For Sri Ramakrishna, he saw with his own eyes how people are greedy after money, how miserable they become, and how deprived they are of peace and all these things. So that through observation and experience, one learns more than what one learns in the classroom. You will be given theoretical knowledge, but in the laboratory of life, you learn through experience. And Sri Ramakrishna was one of the greatest pioneers of this kind of education. So also he believed. He taught, in fact, Holy Mother. Most of the things we think he only gave the mantras and he taught spirituality to Holy Mother. No, he taught her how to observe things, how to react in the world, how to behave with different grades of people, how to live in the world, যেখানে যেমন সেখানে তেমন, how to adjust yourself according to circumstances, how not to waste water while washing vessels, how to use less oil. He was so meticulous in his training of the young Sarada, who was very young. He knew she had to live for a long time. So he was teaching her how to live a frugal life, full of peace, full of detachment, and full of vairagya, so that you don't get bound in the circumstances. She lived under extremely different circumstances. Not that after marriage her things improved. She faced dire poverty when she was young. After marriage, Sri Ramakrishna also, after his passing away, she had to face dire poverty. In fact, the whole life, and she had to bear the burden of all the people who were thrust by the greedy family members on her. Radhu was not her responsibility. She was thrown out of her house. So Radhu and her Surabala, Radhu's mother, Surabala, who were both rejected by their own husbands, they came and lived with her. So also Yoginma and Golapma and others who had nowhere else to go, they were widows. So there was a big, she accepted everybody. With all her difficulties, she didn't find, she didn't create this problem. She didn't marry and have her problems created by her own children. It was somebody else's mistakes. She absorbed all that sorrow and she became a great teacher, showing a lesson how one can live a life of renunciation in the midst of all these worldly people and show, like Sri Ramakrishna did. Of course, Sri Ramakrishna was full of divine experiences. There were people to support him. Mathur Babu was there. But Holy Mother, practically, afterwards, only 1910 onwards, Swami Shardananji and others managed to build a house for her. Otherwise, she was just struggling and but never complaining. In fact, she said, I feel by the grace of Sri Ramakrishna, I feel that is a picture of bliss is always within me. So no matter how much poverty she had to face, no matter how much problem she had to face, her observations of life, how to avoid falling into worldliness, how to not succumb to Kamini Kanchan, how not to fall a prey to greed of lust and wealth or gold. These lessons you don't require Shastras to tell you. You don't require Vairagya Shatakam and all these scriptures. No doubt they warn you again and again. Bhagavad Gita and all the scriptures, you take up anything, they all teach the same thing, Anasakti. Don't be attached. Because they know that this is the cause of sorrow. Even Buddha, you take Christ, everywhere you find the same core teaching which is repeated. But all these teachings came in the setting of poverty. Jesus Christ was born poor, he died poor. You take up everybody. Even Buddha had to voluntarily relinquish his kingdom and uh, accepted poverty. So these life lessons which we learn in the laboratory of life through our own experience, through other sufferings, who also are our great teachers. That is why these uh, great saints, they never criticize these sinners. They say, is not humanity getting some wonderful lessons from the life of Girish Chandra Ghosh, the transformation he underwent, the kind of life he led, the amount of, he himself says, there is not a single evil deed which I have not done in my life. So they are also some kind of learning experiences. They came to Sri Ramakrishna, they surrendered to him, and Sri Ramakrishna used them as a model to show that even a worst person in the worst possible circumstances can come with the help of spirituality, redeem themselves, change their lives, transform their lives. So these observations and experiences of day-to-day life are far more important than the academic learning that we have. And that helped her to become a great teacher. Sri Ramakrishna definitely taught her how to lead a happy life in the world. But all these things she had to learn through observation and experience, which was her education, her schooling, her university, her everything. So that is the takeaway from today's talk, how Sri Ma Sharda Devi was trained by the great educator, that is Sri Ramakrishna, and also her education which continued throughout her life. As Sri Ramakrishna said, as long as I live, so long do I learn. So that experience, that continued learning, that constant learning, that through observations and experience, helped her to teach other people, to teach them how to live in this world. That is why we find this life so inspiring. She taught not only by gave theoretical knowledge, but she taught through her own experience. She taught through her own life. So we will just now see if there are some questions. If there are some questions, you ask. Now, Pranams Maharaj, sacrifice seems to imply one's own volition. Yes, one has to do it willingly. Sacrifice, whether one does willingly, obviously it implies that one has to voluntarily do it. When Swami Vivekananda once asked, he said, a great sacrifice is going on. Some people do it because of compulsion. Some people do it out of choice, willingly, like Holy Mother. But those who do out of choice, Swami Vivekananda says, voluntarily, out of one's own volition, then that suffering loses its power and one can still enjoy peace. But if one thinks that one is burdened, one is forced because one was not ready for it, then it becomes suffering. That is what sorrow is all about. When suffering comes, when you think the world will give us happiness, when money will give us happiness, when lust and greed will give us happiness, and when we don't get that happiness in spite of working very hard for it, when it causes more problems than the happiness that it gives, then we suffer because it is not a voluntary suffering. We thought it would give us happiness, but it has given us sorrow. But if we do it voluntarily with volition, knowing fully well that the greed is always not worth running after, it is if the needs are fulfilled somehow, the struggle for need is not a painful struggle. The struggle for greed is far more painful and far more sorrowful, and it totally shatters a person. So needs never shatter. That's why though these families, Sharda Devi's father, mother, and Sri Ramakrishna's parents, though they had to undergo a lot of poverty, but still they were strong enough, they were noble enough, and they were peaceful enough to lead a very noble life. They never compromised with truth because they knew the needs, if they are lessened, if you have the Nivrutti Marga in front of you, and if you don't go after Pravrutti Marga, which in the beginning looks attractive, but finally it creates such a heavy burden that you are crushed under that and one becomes sorrowful. So the wisdom that they get from life's experiences is to follow the Nivrutti Marga, follow the path of Abhyasa and Vairagya. Yeah. So how is their life a sacrifice? So it is definitely a sacrifice from our point of view. That is why people, when they look at monks and they look at, in fact, I have heard so many people, even Swami Vivekananda was traveling in a train. He saw that he was hungry, was not able to get any food. So one rich man with lot of money was buying lot of food and continuously eating and taunting him. So he said, you see, because you are a wandering monk, you are not getting food, and see, because I work hard and I earn money, I am eating these sweets and all those things. He enjoyed torturing Swami. Swami Vivekananda, of course, was thought that this is not the first time I met fools. But then he found something strange. When the train stopped, a man came running. He said, my Ishta Rama came and told me that there is a hungry sannyasin in a train. He needs food. So I immediately prepared this hot luchis and all these things and I'm giving it to you. So there were tears in Swamiji's eyes. He knew Sri Ramakrishna had somehow influenced this man to feed him. Seeing that, the rich merchant was shocked, but I don't think he learned his lessons. He still might have felt that running after money and running after gold and prosperity is okay. Only when he finds that these things are not giving him peace and these things are ultimately, it will result in sorrow, that he will perhaps turn to spirituality. But that did not disturb Swami Vivekananda. He just smiled at him, smiled at his foolishness, smiled at his taunts that he gave, said, you people, young people, renounce everything, and then you see, I work hard, I make a lot of money, that's why I can eat all these things. So their life is not a sacrifice. Swami Vivekananda never thought that by not eating or by leading such a frugal life, he was sacrificing anything. He got far more. It's not a sacrifice for people who know about it, who are having a spiritual ideal. For them, it is a joy. It was a joy for Sri Ramakrishna, the voluntary poverty that Jesus Christ said. So, all the people, all the great saints, though they suffer, even the crucifixion, where he had to even sacrifice his body, that was not a sacrifice because he had touched the spirit. And he knew the spirit nobody can take away from me. I live a life of the spirit, and that is the goal of my life. No matter if I am hungry, if somebody crucifies me, after all, they are taking away the gross from me. It does hardly matters. That is the kind of sacrifice. If it is a sacrifice from the point of view of a worldly person, but from the point of view of the spiritual person, it is not a sacrifice. He says it is good riddance that the body is gone. Why do I care for that? I am not attached to the body. I am not attached to this money. As Brahmananji saw the kambal, the 2-3 blankets, costly blankets that were kept, he would have found it a burden to keep these blankets with him because he did not need them. And somebody came and took it away. He would have been very happy with that thief. He said, oh, it's good that I am saved the burden of storing all these things. So it all depends on that. Yes, in Cairo, Swamiji was reminded of Surdasa's bhajan, Prabhu Mere Avaguna Chitana Dharo, which he heard in Khetri. It may be because he would have, I don't know whether it was Cairo, but there was a similar incident which happened in the Khetri Maharaja's place, where Swami Vivekananda, normally in those days, it's only the men of who belong to the category of prostitutes or such ill-famed who lived in the houses of ill-fame, they came and performed this dance. No decent woman would come and dance in the court. So Swami Vivekananda, his first reaction was when his disciple, the Ajit Singh ji, the Maharaja of Khetri, said, Swamiji, we have a beautiful dance performance, singer who is an accomplished singer, but so Swamiji obviously knew that they did not belong. So he had some kind of ego that I would not meet a impure person. That was when he started his spiritual life. But the lesson he learned that day, but that lady, who though she was helpless, she belonged, circumstances had forced her to lead that kind of life. But she sang a beautiful Surdas bhajan. Surdas is a great saint. So Surdas is praying to Lord Krishna, saying, Prabhu mere avaguna chitanadaro. Don't, if you reject me, because I have performed certain evil deeds, society has forced me to become a bad woman. But if you don't save me, then who is there to save me? If you condemn me, even you, Krishna, so she sings this song. And then Swamiji learns a great lesson. He says, why am I criticizing her? Why am I considering her to be a fallen woman? That would be injustice, because the Lord looks, and then she samadar she namatiharo, means God is supposed to be the same sightedness, to look upon everybody in the same way, whether one is good or bad. If if the Lord believes in that, then why are you behaving with me like that? Why are you partial to good people and partial towards good people? You have to be impartial. So listening to that touching song, Swami Vivekananda goes back to that lady and tells her, I'm very sorry. I following the normal social custom, I made a mistake by passing a judgment. The same thing happened in the life of Jesus Christ. Some priests wanted to stone a woman to death because she had broken certain commandments. So Jesus said, okay. Then she had come, she fell at Jesus's feet because they would have killed her. And the punishment was to cast stones and hit such fallen women. So that woman comes and Jesus tells these priests who had come to kill her, stone her to death. He said, okay, you can kill her because she has broken a command, but the person who has never sinned in his life will be the first one to cast a stone. He will be the first one, and then others can do. Let me see who is there. And then all the priests just left that place because all of them had sinned. So that shows that you don't have the right to judge. It is God who will judge these people and save them. That is the idea. Yes. Yes. Although Sri Ramakrishna did not pursue formal education, is it true that he could write in Bengali? No, he learned to read and write. He was not educated in that modern sense of the term, but he definitely was a great artist and his handwriting is still there. He could write in beautiful Bengali, and in fact he copied some verses which are still preserved in the museum, Ramakrishna Museum. So he was a very great artist, though he could not read and write. I think he could reproduce, maybe he could not read fluently, but whatever he saw, he could reproduce exactly. So that's why his handwriting was so beautiful. He was very good at art, drawing. So I think he could write Bengali. Of course, he could speak Bengali, though it was a colloquial Bengali, but it was very effective. So formal education was not there, but he could write in Bengali. So I'll take leave now. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.